Great. So welcome to everyone to today's webinar. The purpose for this webinar is essentially to highlight cost, new sustainability, and climate finance data standards. But we also want to use this occasion to share learnings about applying these standards at both the national and subnational level. Would also like to hear the learnings from those members of COST who are equally members of OGP on how they can use such standards to support open government through transparency in infrastructure. The next slide. So we are essentially going to build on existing COST standards, but placing an emphasis on driving data publication. This webinar has been organized as part of our support to the Open Gov Week policy areas, which includes access to justice, enhancing public participation, protecting right to information, fighting corruption, and combating climate change, among others. And we do hope that all these voices will be included through specific data points as we build on what we already doing as COST. And if we essentially move to the next slide, Marie. But let's talk a little bit about climate change. Climate change, as we all know, continues to affect rather disproportionately the global south, and this has been compounded by poor infrastructure. Therefore, when we're talking about climate finance and the need for climate finance investments, we need to pay attention to how the financing is done, and most importantly, the mitigations that are needed for large-scale investments in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the format for today's webinar, if I may just speak to that on the next slide, is that we're going to have 4 interventions from distinguished speakers who I will be introducing in a short while. We will also have time for a Q&A at the end of these presentations. But I'd like the attendees to just note that we'll not be able to come on camera. However, you're encouraged to ask questions via the Q&A function and the chat box. And please note that Spanish translation is also available. There is a message on how you can access the Spanish interpretation in the chat. It will give you more guidance on how that will be done. But let me introduce who is going to speak. But before I do that, just to indicate that the outline is fourfolds. We will do the introduction to the new data modules. We'll then talk about members' experiences, both from Latin America and Africa, and we'll look at Asia, the plans that are underway for West Lombok. And who's on the panel who's going to speak? That's just a little bit about myself. As moderator, I'm a member of the COST board, and I'm also chair of the Council of the International Anti-Corruption Conference. I've also been associated in the past with Transparency International, both at chapter level and at the global board level. But I'll introduce the first speaker, Maria Prado. She is the COST Senior Policy and Research Advisor who leads policy analysis and research to evaluate the impact of cost programs and inform strategic decision making. She has a legal background and she brings a lot of experience in contract management, compliance, transparency, and governance issues, among others. Welcome, Maria. The next person who will speak to us is Manuel Gonzalez, our COST Senior Regional Manager for Latin America. He leads on the strategy in the region. He identifies for us opportunities for collaboration within the region, but also provides technical support and advice to the region's country managers and the multi-stakeholder groups. Manuel is a lawyer and has specialized in public contracting, public administration and governance, as well as transparency and anti-corruption policies. Manuel, you're very welcome. I hope we can see your face on the screen. Next is Geoffrey Odong. Geoffrey is the COST Uganda Program Officer with over 13 years experience working with civil society at community, district, regional, and national levels in Uganda. And Geoffrey's time at Coast Uganda has seen the increase in citizen media engagement. And Coast Uganda is championed by the Ministry of Works and Transport, but hosted by the Civil Society Africa Freedom of Information Center. Geoffrey, you're very welcome. Hope to equally see your face pretty soon. Last but definitely not the least, Imam Patrajaya is the Coast West Lombok manager. And this is from the time that West Lombok joined Coast in 2019. And he has engineering and IT expertise, working on projects that is focused on marine waste, transportation, and image detection. And during his time at Coast, West Lombok, we noted that the program has published infrastructure data on over 2,000 projects using these open contracting for infrastructure data standards. And we just do provide additional information on the convening that is done by the Road Traffic and Transportation Forum, where Coast West Lombok is associated. So we will start with Maria just giving us an indication on why this standard has been created and what the standard covers so that we can all work on the same basis. Maria, you have 10 minutes just to give us this overview of why the standard and how it has been created. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you, Ruben. And thank you, hello, all colleagues. I'm really delighted for this opportunity to be talking about our new sustainability and climate finance modules, particularly during this OGP week. And I think it's important before we jump into the modules themselves, just to give you an overview of the journey so far, because I think in this case, as much as important as the modules themselves is the journey that led us to those modules. So really quickly giving you this our data journey started back in 2008 when we first developed the Coast Infrastructure Data Standard, the IDS for short. And during a period of 3 years during our pilot, we really conceptualized the IDS of this list of key categories of data or data points, that's easily to say, that procuring entities, governments, and authorities would be suggested or encouraged and expected to disclose, which is to publish, put in the public domain, key points of information throughout the project cycle. I think an easy way to think about the IDS is just think about an X-ray as really giving this very clear image of the bare bones of an infrastructure project and how it is being implemented throughout the cycle. It is, I said it was developed in 2008 as the first conceptualized, but which is almost 20 years ago, but remains very, very relevant and the foundation from our work today. The IDS, it covers 40 categories of data that includes, for example, the project budget, the date the budget has been approved, explanation on social and environmental impact, number of firms that participating on the tender process, also overruns, time overruns, cost overruns, and even the explanation for the reasons of those changes in the project scope and duration. So as you see, it's quite critical information giving this kind of the skeleton of how the project has been implemented. And this 40 data points or categories of data, they're complemented by 27 ones that are really the support and documentation. So the underlying documents that would just help us to validate the data that is published and you really accomplish greater transparency and accountability. The IDS is quite unique, not only because it covers the project cycle, but also because it combines project data and contract data. And that because we all know one project might be composed by different contracts. For example, you can have a construction contract, you can have a supervision or design, and our standard really encompasses that and capture the full picture. And it helps, it really allows data to be published at scale. And that because the IDS is really structured and is standardized in a way around those common data points. As much as it is an X-ray, think about the IDS as this very good wine that is maturing with time. It's allowing new experiences. And as you see here in our journey, those new experiences and new steps in our path. So the first one was in 2019. We developed with our friends from OCP, the Open Contracting for Infrastructure Data Standards, or C4 IDS in short. And the IDS and the OC4 IDS, they are only, the difference between them is just really a matter of the formatting, because the OC4 IDS, it's a structure around an open data language. So think about they're kind of dressed differently because they are still referring to the same data points, the elements of what is to be disclosed, and the OC4 IDS always comes to say how to be disclosed using an open contracting language. And this allows like you open up the new possibilities for the standard, mostly because it really allows data to be imported from different sources, different other portals, for example, procurement portals, and being combined itself. So allowing more scalability in terms of how data is merged all together in different platforms, but also better monitoring, helping us to track the information throughout all the contracting and project cycle. And those key points that I said about scalability, data integration, it really led to the possibility of developing new data analytic tools, new dashboards, and that's really also open up new avenues of possibilities for transparency and accountability. That because when data is aggregated, it allows it to be analyzed for new insights. And just like some examples that we've seen from your work with different members. So we can, for example, very easily identify through using data analytics the top 5 contractors related to the largest projects and biggest delays, which is something that Sekondi Takaradi, our member in Ghana, is already doing in their cost platform. But also we can look at, for example, the location of projects and really being able to look geographically how investment are being allocated and being able to see inequalities in that distribution and then asking the question of why this distribution has been unequal. Also as well, you can look at projects that are being approved in an election year and see what type of projects they are. Also in procurement, emergency procurement, using data analytics, you can easily filter and see what's the average of time between the budget and when the budget has been approved and when construction really started. We can also give you insights if the emergency was actually an emergency or not really an emergency one that would require an emergency procurement regulation. And all this background really led us to developing these new sustainability and climate finance new modules. And the reason why we just developed those is, of course, we developed the IDS in 2008. A lot has changed since then, in terms of procurement landscape. Even like the procurement itself, the concept of procurement has evolved from a really focus on price and cost to really looking at also environmental and social aspects in procurement. We also went through a pandemic that really pointed gaps in terms of procurement, integrity in procurement. There was an opportunity to plug those gaps as well. And also because it was also an opportunity because as the IDS, it covers from the planning up to the delivery, but it also allowed us to see through the initial stages in the project cycle in terms of decision making and also how those dynamics really are, and just thinking through and getting more transparency, but also looking at the final stages. So after a project is delivered, looking at operation and maintenance. So it's really an opportunity for us to rethink how we can cover not only the project cycle, but the full investment cycle. And you see also emergence of new emergency, climate emergency, social rights, workers' rights, all these different new challenges in procurement that allows us to think, how can we strengthen our standard? And that's how we came to those modules we developed in 2023, 2024. Now in the process of, with the support from FCDO, Responsible Infrastructure Campaign, we are implementing it in, as I'm going to say later on, in Jalisco and also in Uganda, but also we have other members that are, so OGP members, Malawi, Ghana, Mozambique, Kaduna, for example, they're already adapting their own platforms in order to receive those data points. I just left it here, number 6, because it just shows we're going to continue our journey. It doesn't stop here. We're looking into AI, new analytic tools, and it's a new broad range of possibilities, just to say that our standard is actually a dynamic one, and we continue to look into future. Well, let's take a stop and see about what's the matter at hand, which is exactly the new modules. first I want to say why we look at sustainability as this kind of guiding star, this North Star in developing those new data points, new modules. In a very summarized nutshell, because of time, is that because there's different elements, dimensions of sustainability, economic, financial, climate, and environmental, social, and institutional, that really kind of help us cover those different challenges we see in procurement and also in the way infrastructure is planned, is delivered, and is operated. And why climate finance? Because first, we're all living through climate emergency, but also we all know that we moved from global warming and we're in global boiling now. But not only that, we are also in the magnitude of this climate finance is completely unprecedented. The amount of investment addressing those climate mitigation adaptation are really, like, we're talking about billions and billions. And at the same time, I have a lot of evidence already showing that there's not much accountability, and the money might be flowing to the opposite of mitigation and adaptation, and it might be actually contributing to make the climate emergency even worse. I already covered the what we're doing and how and why, because of changes, and the how very quickly we combine a different method approach, so literature review. We also look at, we developed a global survey with more than 300 people participating, different focus groups, expert interviews, webinars, more than 100 people engaged directly during those just 2 years where we developed those new data points. Also look at what data was already available, and the idea being, could we repurpose that data to be used for under those new indicators and data points? And the result was these modules that I'm going to show to you very quickly, and that we combine two key elements here, not getting more transparency, but also the idea of standardization, which is critical for us to have in the platforms more data at a scalable production publication. So moving very quickly to give you an idea of these different modules, what we're covering on them. So in the economic and financial side, we're covering the short-term, but also the long-term economic and financial aspect. We're also looking at fiscal and budgetary implication of projects, and really going up to the operation and maintenance as well. So for example, this is list of a type of data that we're encouraging governments, procurement entities to make public. So for example, the procurement strategy, which is the strategy behind the procurement plan, so we can get a better clarity in the decision-making process. Also looking at the life cycle cost and life cycle calculation methodology, which is just looking not only the costs for executing a project, but also the whole life cycle of that project. Disclosing information on the funding source and budget for all the project for preparation, implementation, and maintenance as well. Getting information and more clarity around cost-benefit analysis if they have been conducted by projects, value for money assessments if they have been published or conducted as well. The asset lifetime, which is the lifespan of a project to be delivered, to be published as well, as much as the budget projection, which is the projection not only for the year one of execution, but for all the years in case of a multi-year project. Also, in terms if there's gaps in that funding information around that, so we can get a better idea if there is issues around contract financial planning, and the maintenance plan or program that is expected to govern the asset operation when the project is already delivered. In the environmental and climate, we're covering here a broad range of aspects, not only environmental risks specifically, but also biodiversity, conservation, disaster, and emissions related. So for example, just to use you an idea, environmental impact category, which is to disclose for entities, governments, procuring entities, to disclose the magnitude of environmental impact using a categorization that is similar from the IFC. Also to publish environmental measures adopted by the project to mitigate or remedy those impacts. And in this case, we developed a list of very typical environmental measures, for example, waste management, responsible source of material, responsible use of land, and also with the possibility with an explanation field if those types are not really meeting what the types of environmental measures adopted by the project. Reference on information on licenses and exemptions being obtained by the project, protected area, which is looking at the project location and cross-reference the project location with available data sets, global data sets that already exist that map worldwide the protected areas. So we could identify if a project is cutting through, crossing some protected areas. What are the conservation measures adopted also from a list? That could be, for example, land restoration, protection of landscape, among others that we referred and identified. The description of the climate risk and that project is exposed to, as well as the climate measures, which is to what degree a project design has been considered mitigation adaptation, information on emissions, carbon emissions, environmental certifications, which is if contractors and subcontractors have certifications, for example, ISO for environmental management. And finally, onto the commission planning about those plans and the costs of those plans as well, if they exist. And the social module, we're covering a broad range of impact, for example, involving inclusion and participation, also health and safety matters. So we start with the number of beneficiaries, direct and indirect beneficiaries, to what degree the project design has considered women, people with disabilities, and a disadvantaged population, not only the design, but also in the implementation. Indigenous land, which is similar to the conservation that I mentioned before. The protected areas is just looking at project location and cross-reference that with available global data sets on indigenous land in order to see if the project is cutting through areas protected, if there is any public consultation meetings occur with impacted populations, if there is budget allocated in case of land expropriation has occurred, if there is budget allocated from the beginning to cover for labor costs, what kind of certifications contractors and subcontractors have in terms of health and safety, different ISOs as well in this case. Also, what exactly are the labor obligations? So looking into the construction contract, and we created also a list of very typical labor obligations to see which ones are being guaranteed on that specific construction contract. Information on accidents, fatalities on site involving workers, what kind of testing materials had occurred. For example, we also create a list. It could be cement, concrete, soil, if building inspections had occurred or not, and also information on jobs generated both during implementation and operation. Finally, the institutional side, we're covering a broad range of integrity risks. For example, to what degree a project is aligned with existing policy and plans. So there's, in order for us to get more clarity exactly on the dynamics of decision making, as well lobbying transparency, the same beneficial ownership, so we can get more clarity around those decision making. Also, what's the processes in place for receiving access to information requests and also answering to those freedom of information requests, and this throughout the project cycle. That's why it is repeated in different stages. The climate finance is in itself, it was part of the journey, but in itself it's been a journey in itself, because climate finance, here you can see it's 33 data points only on that module. And the reason why is climate finance, it has some specific characteristics, specific requirements. Climate finance is mitigation adaptation projects, but coming specifically from climate sources. So they do have some peculiarities that are reflected into those data points. And we did have the support from Professor Rich Calland and the whole team of technical committee overseeing this work. And just to give you a brief overview of this, the 33 data points can be grouped around three kind of main categories of information. So you have one block of data points that are around really the climate transition. So we have climate objective, climate transformation. We have to what degree the project is aligned with the Paris Agreement, national determined contributions, carbon efficiency, carbon footprint. So it's a whole lot of data points that are focusing on understanding better the climate transition intended by the project. The second block would be data points that are related to the financial structure that is being complied with this specific project. So looking at financial instrument, we'll also look at the amount of the investment, the funding source, what is the accredited entity that is accessing the sources from the climate fund specifically, what is the ratio of co-finance, terms of climate finance. So as you see, it's very specifically related to the structure of the climate finance investment. And finally, you have the final group, which is like accountability, integrity related, so to speak, data points. The idea is just to look into not only decision-making process, but what kind of engagement you have with community, impacted community, what kind of beneficiaries are really going to benefit from that project, and looking at the types of project monitoring, performance monitoring, reporting period, and so on and so forth. So just to give it an overview of that as well. I invited you to look at our website when you will see the OC for IDS has been updated. So we still continue to have the core standard because it is a good one. We do not throw it away. And you have the sustainability and climate finance. And this is the structure you'd see. So you can have all the description as I tried to very briefly cover with you here, and also the open data language, as I mentioned before, the IDS and C4 IDS being the same, just a matter of dressed differently. Is that what I mean? How they would look like in practice. So with that, I will move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you. You've laid a very good foundation for us to understand what the new modules are all about. In a brief sense, you've given us that overview of the modules. But we now turn to the members to just get a sense of how they're experiencing the use of these modules. And we'll start with Latin America. Manuel, you speak to us on how you're benefiting from these new models and what are the early initial reactions to using these sustainability models. Manuel,
Thank you.
uh, I'm sure you'll do it in 12 minutes since you're a lawyer. Lawyers don't speak too much.
Yes. I will make the time
Yeah,
perfectly as I'm
great.
running for another call. But
Go ahead.
yes, I'm very honored to represent Jalisco State. This is one of our key implementers in the region in Latin America. Jalisco is the third biggest state and one of the most important states in Mexico, the biggest Spanish country in the world. And we have the privilege of implementing this project together with Maria and our team in Jalisco. Jalisco is an OGP member, is the first OGP member locally in Latin America and in Mexico. And with the support of the FCDO, we managed to implement this responsible infrastructure investment project that is to test some of the new data points in a Spanish country that is Mexico. So we were in a transition of government during this time, so it was very good for a new government to see these new models and how to implement it. And we will explain how we did it in the Jalisco way, as they like to mention, that they like to do things efficient and transparent. Focus on the early stage of an infrastructure development testing. It's very important because in this stage, we don't have so many information in an infrastructure project. So we managed to test a set of 32 data points on the 5 models that Maria just explained to cover these 4 dimensions of sustainability and also 2 data points of climate financing, no? So why, as I mentioned, why the focus on early stage is because it's least transparent normally. There is lack of information. There is a distort of priorities away from public needs. I was there last week and we were having this conversation. I'm going to talk about a little bit more in the next slides, but it introduced bias in project selections from the outsets and undermine long-term value and accountability. No, so that's why it's very important where the decision maker take the decision of why we will start a project and not another one. I like to say, like, why the street is going in one way and not in the other way. So we can pass to the next slide, Maria. Thank you. So the purpose of applying these data points was to identify new and meaningful insights into selections and appraisal and extract lessons. So we were learning on this process. It was a complete learning experience for the Jalisco team, for the IS, and and that's why we are sharing this experience with with all our network to strengthen planning and decision making. And we managed also to identify key points that the state is committed to disclose on this model. So how the testing was conducted, basically, we met some institutions and the infrastructure and works secretary that is like a minister. Jalisco is a state of 7 million population, so it's at the level of a minister. They decide to put a sample of 11 projects. Most of them are publicly funded, so it was with public resources from the state, not nationally, as Mexico is a federal state country. So, and 2 of these projects included were private investments. So we have some PPPs, public and private partnership projects. So, and the total investment that we were in the sample was $1 billion US. So you can see it was a big investment project for the state. Some limitations on this sample and the methodology. It's a small sample of projects for such a big state, but we have some significant investments. So, and in terms of the methodology, findings strengthens through validation meetings. It was a part of the exercise. So we were having last week, actually, a lot of meetings with university students, with civil society organization, with journalists, and also with the private sector and the government to validate the results of this exercise. Yeah, you can pass to the next, Maria. Some of the findings that are very relevant and that we would like to share with you is that the projects with similar characteristics in terms of the sample of the 11 projects we mentioned and similar budgets went through different preparation processes. That's one of the key. I mean, this suggests us that it's not like a complete standard. We also see that there are some PPPs and normal projects, but there were some discrepancies, and these can increase or is a risk of integrity that we identify together with the government, and could create also ambiguity around the process that should be uniformly applied across the project. So we also like to see it as an opportunity to improve this planning process that is the early stage of an infrastructure project. Economic and financial information, also the procurement strategies and information on equity in value for money were missing in some of the cases, or in all of the cases. So the value for money is solely focused on cost efficiency, and it can be harder to see whether the projects are delivering inclusive and meaningful value. No, so we know that there are a project and there is a data point that is marking if there is a value for money specific analyzed. So we are requesting for this. So this information is missing. So also it's unclear whether maintenance budget had been allocated or were simply indicated. And in the validation process, this is something that was carried on by journalists, by civil society, and also by government, that is important to have a maintenance budget clearly for the project, because we build a project and there is no a budget for maintenance, so it doesn't, the life cycle of a project is less if you don't maintain the street, no? And the environmental information are more detailed, but key data is missing. So we know that there is a lot of information on environmental, on climate, but there were some that the ones that we were like measuring, some of them in some projects are missing. So the evaluation of climate and disaster risks, conservation measures, and how after the project is implemented, what are the measures after. An estimate of greenhouse gas emission is also missing. So in terms of also findings, we can jump to the next. So there is a social information also lack consistent approach. As we mentioned before, the number of beneficiaries is the only consistently published data across the sample. So the state is very clear when they're going to do a project. They said like, okay, we're going to benefit this population here, this population there, this amount of population. a data that is very relevant for them to see the distribution of resources across the state. Institutional dimension, a lack of data collection on lobbying. There is no lobby law. I'm currently in Chile, and Chile is the only country in Latin America with a lobbying law. So we were also clarifying this concept in the validation meeting, because there is a lack of knowledge about the lobbying exercise and what's the risk there. And also beneficial ownership, that is very well known, and there is an interest of modifying laws also to have the beneficial ownership of contractors. In terms of the climate finance models, there is no climate finance makers in place yet. Well, I'm going to show you that we have something now after this exercise. Projects receiving climate finance are not easy to identify, and there is a lack of visibility, makes it hard to track climate specific funding. If there is a fund that is going to the state to implement something according to the climate funding, climate change fundings. Next slides. So here are some pictures. There are a lot of pictures of the exercises. We have an amount of around 300 citizens, mayors. These are university students in the right side, and in the left side there is the civil society, the biggest organization. So we made a very participative and with a very good feedback from the biggest academia in Jalisco, that is the third biggest in the whole country. We're talking about the Guadalajara University, the Pan American University, and they were super participative and very interested. So I'm sure we're going to continue working with the academia on developing and implementing these indicators for students, climate change, environmental, social. The data sets are very important. We saw that. And also for civil society, according to each, then there were very good recommendations on them. And I'm sure that we're going to work together with them also to improve it. And then the next slide, I have another slide. Yeah. Yeah, and this is one of the outcomes after we sit with the government. We said, okay, we are going to put so we were in the process of improving our platform locally, so everything was aligned, and we managed to create a sustainability module in the Jalisco OC for IDS platform. So we have a platform that is complying with the OC for IDS, that is open, and we create the module in each project to show the data sets on sustainability in the early stage of projects. So now we have the commitment of the government to start working on disclosing the data that they have. As you know, there are so many data points, but there are some of them are very relevant for them, and some of them are easy to connect with the platform. So we're working together with the Jalisco government and COS Jalisco private sector, academia, and civil society on creating the culture of disclosing this data and using this data, because we need the students to use this data also, because otherwise we are publishing data without sense. And the good thing of this portal is also that it's in English. So we have it in Spanish for the Spanish word, and there is a direct translation at the top. So it's also replicable, not only in Latin America, but also across all our networks. So thank you very much. I hope I took no more than 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Manuel. I know you have to leave at some point, so I want to just take advantage of your presence to essentially ask you, if another stakeholder wanted to start using this standard, whether it is in Latin America or elsewhere, from your experience now, what would you advise them to do? How would they start using this standard with the new modules included?
Thank you, Ruben, for the question. I think that the exercise we were doing with Maria of making the mapping of what's the data they have and what's the interest with other stakeholders of data that should be disclosed is the first step to have a clear commitment from government In Jalisco, particularly, we have the technological platform, but also there is an intention to create, to remake or to renew the public works law that make it sustainable during the time as part of the institutionalization of cost strategy in the state. So I think these three elements is a law reform, technological capacity, and to hear citizens according to each stakeholders, each group, no?
Thanks, Manuel. I'm sure if there are other questions, Maria or other colleagues from the area will be able to answer to those questions. But let's now turn to Uganda. Geoffrey, we want to hear the Ugandan experience and how the rest of Africa is possibly using the new modules around sustainability. Geoffrey, would like to see your handsome face so you can turn on your camera, Geoffrey.
It's mute. Geoffrey, I think you're muted.
My camera is on.
Ah, great.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Robin, the moderator, Maria, and the members of the panel. I want to take the opportunity to appreciate COS-IS for providing this humble opportunity for me to share our experience in terms of the implementation of the new models in Uganda. And indeed, I want to note that as it happens so in Latin America, Jalisco, in Uganda, the same data point, the 32 data points were also tested. And we saw Uganda having a very strong relationship with OGP based on this new data model that has been tested. In Uganda, we sampled a total of 12 road projects that worth about $300 million as per the information that we obtained from the authority where we tested the models. These included internationally and domestically funded road projects. We analyzed the information available to answer the data points, which gave us a valuable insight into how critical road investments are appraised in Uganda, particularly in Kampala, where the model was tested. Next. One of the key findings was that there has been difference in appraisal processes depending on whether the project has been internationally funded or domestically funded project. We saw internationally funded project having much better documentation and recording system for the key element that Maria talked about in terms of cost-benefit analysis, procurement strategies, and then maintenance costs were more consistently available and recorded for internationally funded projects. But this, in contrast, was never the same for domestically funded projects. Even findings of basic appraisal data were a very big challenge in the process of piloting the models. Poor record keeping was noted, and that becomes a very big concern that affected part of the analysis. Next. The other finding is that data showed inconsistency in the preparation processes. For example, risk management plans were available for some of the internationally funded projects, but not all of them had it. And for domestically funded projects, that information was consistently also lacking. Under environmental models, although internationally funded projects carry out environmental and climate assessments, we noted with great concern delays in starting projects that had always meant the assessment can be expired by the time construction work begins. And this shows the needs for system to ensure assessment are still capturing current environmental and climate risk when project starts to be implemented. On the other, climate resilient, no data on greenhouse gas emission were collected or made public, regardless of funding source. And this applies to both internationally or nationally funded projects. Given Uganda's high vulnerability to climate change, without this type of data, risk of maladaptation can increase because some of the projects that could have been implemented in a better way could actually end up increasing the risk of climate change. Next. On social models, in one project worth $190 billion, we found that road crossed a religious and a cultural sites, but this was not mentioned in the cost-benefit analysis or on the social impact assessment report. And this means the data in itself was lacking. Our indigenous land data points was able to capture this aspect, and I think that is how we noticed it. On the issue of resettlement plan, while internationally funded projects prepare these plans, a similar problem of delays in project start often also means the resettlement terms, just as compensation amount, can be outdated by the time construction of this project begins. Next. On social and gender-related data points, most references in data related to equality in hiring during construction, without much evidence of inclusive design or gender consideration being discussed earlier in the planning stage, and this has been noted as something that seems not happening. Under institutional models, gaps in transparency remains when it comes to lobbying activity and the question of beneficial ownership of contractors. None of this data is captured or neither published. On climate finance, lack of climate finance marker. Of course, without it, procurement officials in Kampala could not easily identify which projects are receiving climate finance, and that becomes very difficult for them to determine whether they are actually taking into account this very critical aspect. Next. These findings, we had community consulted or Baraza. One way was to share with them the findings, and also we use the same platform to obtain their feedback on how they participate in the selection and appraisal process of infrastructure. A number of critical issues emerged, and one of the issues that people raised at those community level were that the question of waste management is very critical when you look at most of the design where drainage system seem to be narrow, and when it rains, you find the water floods on the main road affecting the uses of the roads, and this has been very critical. And then the other aspect that was raised was about the question of compensation of those who are affected by those investments. Then the other element is their participation in terms of consulting them at the beginning of identifying which projects should be implemented in which area and what perhaps would be the economic value that would help the community around those areas. So I think those are the few that I could share. But in terms of the leaders' response to the findings, we saw the authority where we piloted the project has come strongly to ensure that they improve on the design, especially to ensure that the design meet the current situation based on the population of the area, also taking into account the question of weather, the weather condition. When it rains, what else should the drainage system, what could be the size, and all this factor is what the leadership of the authority, the Kampala City Authority, is trying to work around. And those are the reform that is on the pipeline based on the discussion that I had with some members of the authority.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. I'm sure you've given us a good overview of what's happening in Uganda. I was just going to ask you whether you're aware of any other African state which are implementing the new models. Malawi, for instance, are you aware of what Malawi is doing, or our colleagues in Ghana?
Yes, well, I am aware that many of our African countries have taken on, especially Malawi, that has already integrated some of these new models into their system, and Ghana alongside. Mozambique is on the pipeline, also working around the same, and there are many more countries that are still interested to implement the new data model. And I think if most of these countries adopt the new standard, then we shall move a long way in trying to improve our infrastructure projects are implemented for the benefit of our own citizens.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Thank you. Shall we then move on to West Lombok? Imam, just to give us again your perspectives on how the model, the importance of using this model, and how you're planning to use it in West Lombok. Imam?
Okay, thank you, Ruben and college from COS for the opportunity and support also on implementing this climate finance model in West Lombok. I also want to say thank you for all the participants that interest in joining this webinar. Okay, so I will begin my section on background and why we want to implement the module in West Lombok. Our plan basically is to achieve a similar and hopefully more significant impact like the one we heard from Jalisco and Uganda. So our background is first, Indonesia is a founding OGP member, and also West Lombok is the first subnational like entity that joined the COS. And the second one is impact of climate change in West Lombok, and Indonesia is one of our reason why we want to implement this early in West Lombok. Next, I will explain to you about our plan implementation and what we expect from climate finance module to be implemented in West Lombok. So our interest first begin is we want to ensure the transparent use of climate related fund in our areas. Also, at the same time, we want to promote accountability and efficient budgeting. And this one is actually aligned with Indonesia's climate adaptation strategies that being implemented recently. Also, we see the fact that West Lombok and NTB is prone to climate effects and disasters, especially on raining season that we on. It's very unpredictable and is affecting so much in planning and construction in infrastructure in West Lombok. Okay, next, Maria. Okay, so there is a certain focus that we want to avoid and to mitigate why we want to implement the module in West Lombok. We see this one as a feature from the Jakarta. We see so many different in terms of pollution in just a short period of time. It's less than 1 year, and we want to avoid this happening in West Lombok. So we plan to gather more data related to the carbon emission. So we can encourage like a government and also other entities to like invest more in green construction and also climate finance. Okay, next. Okay, so in terms of West Lombok, we see a lot like effect of climate change, and also related to climate finance, like we see in the picture in here, several roads are being like collapsed due to different reasons, mostly from the rain, and also from the like there is a certain dam that been built that's supposedly to solve the problem, but instead making the problem worse. So there's no data that being published related to the how many investment that they spend on mitigation, on building certain climate finance infrastructure in West Lombok. So these two focus that we want to address and mitigate, and hopefully we can achieve that by building a strong data history and data point, and encourage people to, like a government and public, to mitigate and care more about the climate finance, and yeah, just basically to mitigate this issue, we need strong data points on climate finance. And good things that on cost, they have the new climate finance module that I think we could gain impact and help from this module. Next, Maria. Okay, so come back again. What we want to implement in West Lombok is specifically on two data point that actually could help in building infrastructure, resilient infrastructure in West Lombok, and also monitoring the climate finance related to the infrastructure. So we basically focus on road projects that being planning in this year, all of the roads projects. As it being a planet, we not certain of how many a budget they will allocate on the project itself, on the climate finance. But we want to see these two specific data points in those projects. The first one is a carbon emission related data publication. This is to achieve like like aligned with the Indonesian's net zero emission in just recently in this March being launched. And also what we experienced previously related to how to mitigate the unpredictable raining season is when we conduct the public consultation. But until today, we couldn't see the public data related to how many public consultation that being implemented specifically on infrastructure projects. So when we implement this module and data point, hopefully we can get like is it actually happening in all of the projects, or it's just on a certain infrastructure? Okay, next, Maria. Okay, so again, we are going to focus on the road project, and this is actually one of the projects. This place, the picture in here is one of the project that is going to be implement in West Lombok, and we will focus on how a government will manage the climate change and climate finance on this particular project and all of the road project in West Lombok. So what we want to achieve is actually the first one is availability on climate related data, especially on carbon emission and number of public consultation on road projects. So we can encourage government to see that this is need to be like increase in awareness for the government and public on this issue. Also, we also want to see the indirectly affect, like if there is an increase on number of drainage on road project, because this is basically the one that like reduce the age of the road infrastructure in West Lombok. And also the last one is increasing capacity on the stakeholder on climate change issue and climate finance, because currently we don't even see that if there is a interest in mitigation and put an investment on climate related infrastructure and also climate related project. in West Lombok. But hopefully with this being published, and we will like to implement in our portal. Currently we have two portal in which is Intrust and also its analytic dashboard. So we would like to see that it's appear in those two platform, and we also encourage other entities to apply the same data, like because we actually open for other portal to also implement our data points. Okay, next, Maria. Okay, so previously we say that West Lombok and NTB is also prone to the like unpredictable raining season and also disaster. So we have this currently working existing portal on climate and disaster tools, which is implemented in NTB. Also, the second subnational member of COST International. So we can easily also put this data into this similar portal and see if it's get more impact for the other areas also. I encourage people to click on this link to see how we can get so many information in just a simple portal on this. And with additional data from the climate finance model, I think it will be more useful in terms of sustainability infrastructure and also to fight the zero emission achievement that we like to plan in the future. Okay, thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you very much, Imam. Thank you for giving us an overview of what you're planning to do in West Lombok using the new models. So we've heard from Maria giving us an overview of the evolution of the standard and how we've arrived at the new models. She's talked to the data points that the new models would like, which we're going to use in doing our work as COST. We've got a couple of experiences shared from Jalisco, Uganda, and now West Lombok. Now we'll turn to the questions because we'd like to hear from you. We've already received 4 questions. Maria, your question will be the clarification in the difference between OCP standard and OC4IDS. Manoa has provided a few answers, but in case you'd like to make additional points, Maria, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Ruben. One point before going to that in detail, just to say that these new modules, it was something that because of the limitation in my first intervention, I didn't cover in full. But these new modules, they are going to be working in addition to the core standard. So the idea is that governments and procurement entities and authorities, they can't just choose and select what kind of modules they would like to apply, what kind of data points they would like to apply for a more concentrated and getting more clarity on any transparency on specific areas. So the idea is that it will work concurrently as well. So just that point that I missed from my first intervention. As to the point of the difference between the ODS and the OC4IDS is because the OC4IDS is specific for infrastructure. And so it really combines not only the contracting side of it, which is the open contracting data standard, but also we cover specific aspects from an infrastructure project perspective. So that's the main specificity of that. So it uses the same open data language, open contracting principles that OCDS does. But in terms of what is to be disclosed, what is to be published, it goes into more detail of an infrastructure project and covering those nuances I mentioned before, not only individual contracts, but also the whole project as well. There's one question that I saw in the chat that I think if I can just use the time since I'm here, is somebody asked about how these modules can be used to support open government policy areas. And I think this is a great question because it shows the potential for these data points. I think first to try to answer that is when we developed those modules, when we developed those indicators, what we had in mind, it was what kind of insights, what kind of new insights the data could trigger to us. So it's not about like, we just wanted more information, more data available. Was not transparency for transparency's sake, because we all know transparency is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And the way we developed those modules, the idea was very a forward-looking approach, so to speak. The idea was just we're trying to anticipate what kind of new insights those modules could bring once that data is started being published more systematically and put in the public domain more systematically as well. So that's a bit of the underlying it. And there's two ways that the modules, all these data points can work for open government to improve practices. One is from the perspective of authorities, perspective of governments, those that are public, or the data publishers, I would say, so those that are putting the information. So it helps them because first they can create a system that is uniformly applied to all projects, because based on the findings from Jalisco in Uganda, we've seen is that most of the time we don't have much systems, or the data is not really the same across different projects. So that creates open areas for lack of integrity, or even biases for favoritism, for example. So the idea from the point of view of procuring entities, it creates a system that you need to disclose all that information and put in the public domain, all that, to create a system. And also it serves as a bit of a list of requirements. So it's a list of, okay, I needed this data to be, in order for me to be in a better position, better place to deliver infrastructure that is sustainable in those different dimensions and is respecting climate finance requirements as well. So it's a way, can serve as a list of requirements, so to improve them on planning practices. This is from the government perspective. And from the perspective of civil society, I think there's great value as well. And that because it can use and guide civil society to ask the right questions. And what do I mean by that is because you have a list of indicators, data points, or just key information, because that's the whole idea of the IDS I mentioned before. It's just critical information that we understand should be encouraging to be published, because they're critical for improving practices and delivering infrastructure that is with quality, that is inclusive, that is meeting public needs, and also in line with climate emergency. So it helps civil society to get working as a bit of a guidance. So they can ask, is that information available? And if it's not, why not? And I think it helps providing this guidance and for civil society to ask the right questions, either when the information is not available, or information may exist but is not being published that could exist as well. So just to kind of, Ruben, I just wanted to give those points and ask that question, answer the question on the chat.
Thank you very much, Maria. There are a few other questions. There's one, what has been the biggest lesson so far from the creation, implementation, and consideration of these modules? Geoffrey, would you want to come in before Maria says something? Geoffrey, are you still with us? Probably he's dropped off. Imam or Maria, would you want to speak to that? Some of the biggest lessons, very briefly?
Okay.
Yeah, great. You're back.
Oh,
Go ahead, Geoffrey. Go ahead.
Okay. I think part of the lesson learned from this process is that data is power, and it helps us to mirror ourselves on the best practices that we have in the implementation of public infrastructure. And through this exercise, we have seen, for instance, in Uganda, the entity has come openly to the beneficiaries of their project about the project that are on the pipelines, informing them about project on the pipelines, and this help citizens to raise concern before the implementation of this project actually begins. And I think that becomes very important for addressing some of the gaps that we saw in the previous project. And if they follow that process, then we believe the project would be owned and sustainably used by the citizen. The other element is that we know practices improves when evidence and lesson are learned from a previous kind of studies that are done. And I think this study has provided evidence on different areas based on the standard that was tested. And this entity is now aware of the gap that they initially had in the initial stages of planning. And I think this will help them improve the planning process at the initial level, and that would improve how the entire infrastructure project is delivered. That is what I wanted to add on the question that you raised.
Great. Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Imam, would you want to come in? What do you
Yes,
see as a potential? Go ahead. Go
okay.
ahead.
Just a quick response on our experience actually and implementing other cost modules outside of this climate finance one. So I would like to respond on several questions. The first one is what has been the biggest lesson so far from creation implementation consideration of this module is actually we as we know, I don't know if it's happened in other areas also. We previously are like have a huge impact on it changing leadership on agency and also procuring entity. So what we see is actually they tend to repeat the problems happen every year. After the change of leadership, certain problems appear again. So with the modules from course and data points that we've been published, we can like track the problems in very good manner, so we can avoid it's being happen in the following years or even the same years that there is change on a leadership. And also the second one, how can a new stakeholder start to use the standard if they're interested today? I think Maria will have a good answer, but I think all of the standard that being published by COS is open source, so including our portal. So just pick which one that you like to interest on implement, and we will like we will very happy to assist on implement those tools and standard. Yeah, I think that's from my side. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Maria, you want to chime in?
Yes, I think in terms of the lessons learned, I think 100% was agreed with what my colleagues have said. I just would like to add that by applying it, I think because the way we applied in Jalisco and Uganda was just testing it to see what information were there, where the gaps were, and when information sometimes was maybe not published. So we kind of gave us a really good heat map of maybe where the integrity hotspots, potentially integrity hotspots could be in the planning area. So it really helps to pinpoint maybe in providing to the governments the kind of entry points. Let's say maybe here is something that needs to be strengthening. Maybe this and this areas you could put that information to be as a requirement for all projects, for example. So I think it gave us a really good idea of, a map, really like a heat map of what the potential risks for integrity in the planning, decision making, they could be. Because just remember, we're in that two pilots where we had a focus on the decision making and selection. So this was one. The second one I think I would like to add is specific on the climate finance. It was very quickly we realized that that is just very hard for even procuring entities and the agencies to identify their portfolio of projects that are receiving climate finance. And that's why we translated that, and there is no climate finance marker. So they could not just kind of easily identify it. And it happened in case that we need to really trace back the information by looking at, the structural funding, and then look at the structural funding and then kind of mapping back. So we could say, okay, no, this one is actually from a climate source. But I think that pointed to not only like it's not easily identified. So nowadays, because of the lack of consistency in reporting that information, it's very hard to have the idea of the portfolio. But a second point is that the information is quite scattered when it talks about climate financing. So it is divided between the funder, it might divide it, the accredited entity that is accessing the resources from the climate source fund, from the procuring entity itself. So it kind of validated us in creating this module. It's specific, that potential of this new standard on climate finance to combine that in one single source of truth in one place only. So I think, which is like speaking to my first point, it was a critical integrity hotspot identified as well. I think that's my two key learnings from the experience so far.
Thank you very much, Maria. I know we have one hand up, Lorraine. I can't see who's put up their hand, but please go ahead and make your contribution. Okay, I am still seeing one hand raised, but probably.
Okay, maybe I can add one more. I just see one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. On how does cost approach of multi-stakeholder working, data publication, independent review of data, and social accountability support the implementation of this module? What I actually like thinking will happen is actually the implementation of this module will support the cost approach, all of this cost approach. And so it's not otherwise. Because if we have these modules implementation, we have like a very strong data that can be used to strengthen all of the cost approach, including the multi-stakeholder working. So they have a more like capacity in addressing and mitigation the climate change issue, and also how they can comment on the very new issue in Indonesia, basically about the climate finance. So it will in short term, maybe it will strengthen the multi-stakeholder working, but in the long term, it can strengthen the infrastructure itself, because the climate finance, if it's implementing well, it will increase all of the other infrastructure in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Geoffrey, I wanted to ask you how and why you think that these standards should be used by countries that are outside your region, but also outside the COST membership. Not every country is a member of COST, but if you were to give any advice, why should they adopt these modules and these standards?
Thank you very much for the question, Ruben. I think we are looking at globalization, where standards applied globally influence the way practices in this sector would be implemented. And it would be very good for all the other countries, even if they are not part of COST, because we are part and parcel of the global global action. So we see many countries around the world are investing a lot of money in public infrastructure. And therefore, this standard is very pertinent in trying to address the gaps that have always been there, creating risks in terms of how these public resources are used. And therefore, if all the other countries adopt these standards, then we can be able to see likelihood of addressing these gaps in the planning and design, and therefore what we call leakages in terms of how resources are spent would be reduced, and this would add value that the little resources that countries have would be used effectively to provide the intended in public infrastructure that benefit the citizen in terms of maybe improving road net transportation, trade, and all this. And this, again, will contribute to the improvement of lives of the people. Cost standard should focus globally, because when we are talking about improving lives, we cannot say we only improve lives of people who are our members. because this is about humanity, and this humanity is rooted in the public resources that are invested by the different states. So it would be prudent for the different states to understand these models, the standard, apply them, because it would address inefficiencies that will make them up quality public infrastructure that will improve their economies and improve lives of their own people.
Thank you, Geoffrey. I know that time is not our best ally, so I'd like to ask the last question, and I would invite all the speakers to say something on this. Can you share more about how these modules can be used to support open government policy areas? If we're to have a one takeaway point on that, what would you be saying? Could I ask Imam to start, and then we'll go to Maria and Geoffrey will have the last say?
Okay, thank you, Ruben. I think the implementation of climate finance model and all of the other models in cost is actually based on the policy area models from the OGP also, because like the first one I think is the civic space. Like I just mentioned that we are interested in how many public consultation happen in West Lombok. I think this will be the one that can be increase the awareness and also increase in the civic space policy area in which is what OGP focus on. And also what we've been doing, like disclosing the data, and now we are increasing the number of data points related to the climate finance is actually what we want to fighting corruption, and especially on like preventing corruption, what I usually call it. It's not directly fighting, and also in the long term, like I said before, we would like, this is the main goal of what we are doing in West Lombok is actually to increase the quality of the public service delivery in all of the infrastructure, especially. Thank you.
Yes, Maria, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. I echo what my colleague Iman has just said. And I would only add at one point, I think we're just stressing again that our tools and standards there can be used by outside a cost member. So they are open source, and we're happy to provide support in other governments that might be interested in applying that. And the second point, I think specifically to the OGP community, I think one challenge that we always see is that how we transform open government commitments into specific actions and plans so we can really deliver on them. So we think it's just the challenge is just to take something that could be abstract as open government and how you translate that in practice. And I think those tools and standards, they come directly into that. It can be a really useful and cost-effective way of helping OGP members having their commitments in open infrastructure, for example, in more transparency and integrity in the sector, to say we can use these tools and standards to help us achieve and meet that specific commitment. So it really helps to give a solid ground in a way and helping OGP members to commit to their or to deliver on those commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Imam, any response on that particular question? Oh, Imam is muted. Okay, great. Is there any other question?
Final remarks from Geoffrey?
Yeah, Geoffrey. Yeah, Geoffrey, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry,
thank you.
You're very close to home, and I'm sorry about that, Geoffrey. I don't want to be kicked out of Uganda.
Yeah, I think the implementation of these models is very critical, and it has a very close linkage to the pillars upon which OGP also thrives. And when we look at the element of ensuring that public infrastructure are implemented in a way that it does not escalate climate change challenges. And in this process, the model will provide indicators that will help entities while planning to focus on projects that minimize and reduces on the effects of climate change. The other component is about injustices are addressed, because when we are saying the question of inclusivity, do we have the question of gender relation in terms of recruitment? How do we allow participation of women, men in the implementation of these public infrastructure? Because if only one sector or men are involved, then we are talking about inequalities, and these inequalities affects how resources are shared among the different people of the world, and then that creates a lot of disparity. And within that disparity, then we are not contributing to what OGP would be interested in. But when we strengthen the implementation of these models, then we are seeing we are trying to address the question of injustice, and also focusing at access to information that will contribute to transparency and accountability. That is very pertinent in all these aspects of implementation of public infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we started off with this webinar with very clear intentions. Number one, to highlight the cost new sustainability and climate finance data standards. We wanted to have an opportunity to share learnings about applying these standards at a national and sub-national level. And we also wanted to highlight how those that are coming from cost and OGP membership can benefit from such standards. And I think we've done a good job. Maria has helped us to understand the standards, and colleagues that are members and on the ground have shared their experiences on how they're applying the modules or how they're planning to do that in the near future. So thank you very much to Maria, Manuel, Geoffrey, Imam, for being wonderful participants and speakers. And thank you to the participants that have joined us and shared and raised very important questions, which have allowed to make this presentation and this webinar a success. Hope to see you soon, and hope you enjoy the rest of the OpenGov Week activities. Geoffrey had something to say before we sign off?
Yes. Sorry. What I wanted to say is that all this work has been possible because we have been supported by the FCDO, and I want to congratulate them for supporting us through this process. It has not been easy, but we believe with that support, we have been able to move a long way, and we believe the findings or the outcome of this study will be able to let them take decision on how they can be able to further support this process, because we have seen interest from public institutions, and if we still have more support, then we can be able to scale up the implementation. Thank you. That is what I wanted just to say.
Absolutely. We definitely thank the cooperative partners working with us. And as you rightly say, there's still work to be done, and we hope we can build on the partnership in order for us to implement these standards in other sectors as well. You have information on how you can get in touch with us. I think we've posted the email addresses and the websites. Please visit them and give us a call if possible, and we can talk about how we can collaborate on this. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.